It was late afternoon when Major General Denise Parker left the leadership seminar in Washington, D.C. The long day had been filled with discussions about teamwork, courage, and respect, the very principles she had lived by for over 25 years in the United States Army. The sun was sinking behind the skyline, painting the streets with a warm orange glow as she drove home in her silver SUV. She looked forward to a quiet evening with her teenage son, maybe a home-cooked meal and a movie. Her uniform was neatly folded in the back seat. She wore simple jeans, a navy jacket, and sunglasses, nothing that revealed her rank or status. As she reached the outskirts of a quiet suburb, she noticed the flashing lights of a police car in her rearview mirror. At first, she thought it was meant for someone else. The road was clear, her speed was within the limit, and she had obeyed every traffic sign. But the siren grew louder. She sighed softly and pulled over, signaling with her hand to show she understood. The police cruiser stopped behind her. 2 officers stepped out, both young men, one tall and muscular, the other lean with a sharp look in his eyes. They walked toward her window, hands resting casually on their belts. Denise rolled down the window halfway and greeted them politely. "Good evening, officers. Is there a problem?" she asked calmly. The taller officer leaned down. "License and registration," he said curtly. His tone was not rude, but it wasn't respectful either. Denise reached into her purse and handed over her documents. "Of course," she replied. "May I know why I was stopped?" The officer didn't answer immediately. He glanced at his partner, then back at her. "You changed lanes without signaling." Denise frowned slightly. She knew she hadn't. The road had been empty for miles, and she had used her signal every time. But she didn't argue. "I see. I'll be more careful," she said politely. The shorter officer circled her vehicle, shining his flashlight inside even though it was still daylight. "You live around here?" he asked. "Yes," Denise replied. "Just 2 streets down." He nodded slowly, eyes lingering on her bag in the passenger seat. "Mind if we take a look inside your car?" Denise felt uneasy. "Is there a reason for that?" she asked in a composed voice. The taller officer folded his arms. "Ma'am, are you refusing a search?" "I'm not refusing," she said, her voice firm but calm. "I'm only asking what the reason is. You already have my license and registration." The air grew tense. The 2 officers exchanged a quick look. Her question, meant to be respectful, somehow irritated them. The taller one took a step closer. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." Denise blinked, surprised. "May I ask why?" "Step out of the vehicle," he repeated. She exhaled slowly and unbuckled her seatbelt. Her military instincts told her that staying calm was the only way forward. As she stepped out, a few neighbors across the street paused in their evening walks, watching the scene unfold. The sun had almost set now, and a golden hue covered the quiet neighborhood. The shorter officer moved behind her car while the other kept a hand near his holster. Denise stood still, hands visible, posture straight, just as she had done during countless military inspections. "Ma'am, we're asking you to cooperate," the tall officer said, his tone sharpening. "I am cooperating," she replied gently, "but I still don't understand what's happening. You said I changed lanes without signaling. That's usually a warning, not a search." The shorter officer came back around. "You were talking back, ma'am. That's obstruction." Denise stared at him, unable to believe what she was hearing. "Talking back?" she repeated softly. "I asked a question." "Turn around," the taller one ordered, her stomach tightened. She had faced tense moments before, in war zones, during security briefings in disaster areas, but never in her own hometown. Never for simply asking a question. "Officer," she began quietly, "I'm Major General Denise Parker, United States Army. Please call your supervisor. There's been a misunderstanding." But the moment she mentioned her title, the shorter officer rolled his eyes. "Everyone's somebody these days," he muttered. "Turn around," the other repeated. Denise slowly turned, her heart steady but heavy. The cold metal of the handcuffs closed around her wrists with a click that echoed louder than the sound of birds in the evening sky. A neighbor gasped softly from across the street. "You are under arrest for obstruction of justice," the taller officer declared. Denise didn't resist. "You're making a mistake," she said quietly, her voice level and clear. They guided her toward the patrol car, hands behind her back. The world around her blurred. People standing on porches, a child holding a bicycle, the scent of grass in the evening air. It felt unreal. She, A woman who had commanded hundreds of soldiers in crisis zones was now sitting in the back of a police car, treated as if she were a threat. Inside, she leaned back against the seat and took a deep breath. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. One of the officers noticed and pulled it from her coat. "You won't be needing this," he said. She gave a faint, patient smile. "Please let me make one call," she said. "It's my right," the officer shrugged. "You can make it at the station." Denise turned her gaze to the window. The streetlights flickered on as they drove away. The journey to the station was short but felt long. She thought about her son waiting for dinner. She imagined his confusion when she didn't return home on time. She thought about her father, a retired sergeant who had always told her, "No matter what happens, stay calm. Respect doesn't come from shouting. It comes from standing firm." When they arrived at the station, the officers opened the door and led her inside. A few people at the front desk looked up, puzzled. One of the clerks whispered something to another. The sergeant on duty, an older man with gray hair, walked over. "What's the charge?" he asked. "Obstruction," said the tall officer. The sergeant's eyes moved to Denise's face. "Name?" "Major General Denise Parker," she said clearly. The room went silent. The typing on the nearby computer stopped. The sergeant blinked. "I'm sorry, did you say Major General?" "Yes," she replied. "United States Army. I was returning from a leadership seminar when I was pulled over." The sergeant looked at the officers. "Did you verify her identification?" She was argumentative, the shorter one said defensively. "Didn't cooperate. Her ID?" The sergeant pressed. "It's in the car," the officer mumbled. The sergeant turned back to Denise, his expression uneasy. "Ma'am, I'll make a call right now." Denise nodded silently. "Thank you." They placed her in a small holding room. Plain walls, metal bench, faint hum of a fluorescent light. She sat straight, wrists still red from the cuffs. She wasn't angry. She was disappointed. In her decades of service, she had faced many forms of challenge, disaster zones, diplomatic negotiations, even life and death decisions. But this moment was different. This was about dignity, about how easily respect could vanish when people saw only what they wanted to see. Minutes later, the door opened. A young officer brought her a cup of water. "Ma'am," he whispered, "are you really a general?" "Yes," she said softly. "And you are?" "Officer Daniels," he replied. "My grandfather served under General Mathers in the Gulf War. He always said generals never panic. I think I understand that now." She gave him a faint smile. "Your grandfather was right. Panic helps no one." The young man nodded and left quietly. She could hear voices outside, the sergeant speaking on the phone, urgent but respectful. She didn't know who he was calling, but she trusted that soon the truth would rise. The night grew still. Somewhere outside, the sound of crickets filled the air. Denise closed her eyes for a moment, remembering her father's words again. Sometimes the uniform isn't what makes people respect you. It's how you carry yourself when they forget who you are. When the door opened again, the sergeant's tone had changed completely. "Ma'am," he said softly, "someone from the Pentagon is on the line. They want to speak with me immediately." Denise didn't say a word. She just nodded. Calm, dignified, steady. Even in the middle of misunderstanding, she knew who she was, and that truth was stronger than any accusation. The quiet hum of the police station filled the air. Denise sat on the narrow bench, her back straight, her hands resting calmly on her lap. Outside the small holding room, voices moved like distant waves, low, tense, uncertain. She had seen fear before, but this was a different kind of fear. It was the fear of confusion, the kind that comes when people realize they may have made a terrible mistake. Through the glass window, she saw the sergeant pacing with a phone pressed to his ear. His brow was furrowed, his hand trembling slightly as he listened. Every now and then, his eyes flicked toward her, as though confirming she was really there. The woman whose name now echoed through the line connecting this small-town station to the Pentagon. In the meantime, the two officers who had arrested her stood near the counter. Their earlier confidence had started to fade. The taller one, Officer Reed, kept checking his wristwatch while his partner, Officer Miller, shifted uncomfortably on his feet. They whispered back and forth, too low for anyone to hear. It was clear that the realization of who they had handcuffed was slowly sinking in. Inside the holding room, Denise stayed calm. Years of military discipline had taught her how to handle pressure. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, steady and patient. In her mind, she went through the same routine she always followed before a big decision: focus, assess, and act with dignity. She wasn't angry. Anger clouds judgment. Instead, she felt a deep sadness, not for herself but for how easily misunderstanding could replace respect. She thought of all the young officers she had trained, men and women who wore their uniforms with pride, learning that leadership meant serving with fairness and humility. And here she was, sitting behind a glass door, waiting for someone to believe what she had said all along. Finally, the sergeant hung up the phone and walked toward the two arresting officers. His expression was grim. "You two better explain this," he said quietly. "Do you have any idea who you brought in here?" Officer Reed frowned. "She said she was in the military. We didn't." "She's not just in the military," the sergeant interrupted sharply. "She's Major General Denise Parker. She's a senior officer in the United States Army. The Pentagon just confirmed it." The color drained from both men's faces. Miller's mouth opened slightly. "General? You mean she's really—" "Yes," the sergeant replied. "And the Pentagon isn't happy. They've already contacted our chief. This is serious." Denise watched through the glass as the two men's expressions changed from disbelief to dread. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. She just waited. The sergeant entered the holding room a moment later. His tone had completely shifted. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I want to sincerely apologize for this entire situation. It appears there's been a terrible misunderstanding." Denise stood up gracefully. "Thank you, Sergeant," she said calmly. "May I have my phone back now?" "Yes, ma'am, of course." He gestured toward Officer Daniels, the younger man from earlier, who hurried to bring it. As Denise took her phone, she noticed several missed calls from Colonel Ramirez, her aide and close friend. She stepped to the side and dialed him immediately. "Colonel Ramirez," she said, her voice low but steady. "It's Parker." "I'm fine." On the other end, his voice came fast and full of concern. "Ma'am, we've already escalated the report. The Joint Operations Office is aware. You'll be released immediately. Do not say anything else to them. The Pentagon will handle it." Denise nodded quietly. "Understood. Thank you." She ended the call and turned back to the sergeant. "Sergeant, I know this wasn't your doing, but I hope your officers understand how serious this was." "Yes, ma'am," he said with a heavy sigh. "They'll face disciplinary action. The chief will be here any minute. He's already on his way." The station had gone completely silent. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed louder. When the door swung open a few minutes later, the police chief himself entered. An older man with graying hair and tired eyes. He walked straight to Denise, removing his hat respectfully. "General Parker," he said, voice tight with worry. "On behalf of the department, I want to personally apologize. This was unacceptable. I take full responsibility." Denise looked at him calmly. "Chief, I appreciate your words, but responsibility doesn't end with apologies. These men need to be reminded that power without respect leads to injustice." The chief nodded, clearly humbled. "Yes, ma'am. It won't happen again." As the officers who had arrested her stood silently in the corner, Denise looked at them, not with anger but with a quiet firmness. "Gentlemen," she said softly, "when someone questions you, it's not always defiance. Sometimes it's just a person asking for fairness. Remember that." Neither of them could meet her eyes. Reed's jaw tightened as guilt washed over his face. Miller swallowed hard, his hands fidgeting by his sides. For a moment, no one spoke. It was as if the weight of what had happened filled every corner of that small station. After a long pause, Denise continued. "I served my country for more than 25 years. I've led people through storms, disasters, and foreign lands. And the one lesson I learned above all is this: never forget to see the person in front of you as human first." Her words hung in the air like a quiet echo of truth. The sergeant lowered his head. The chief cleared his throat softly. "Ma'am, we've already arranged for a full report to be sent to your office, and the department's internal affairs will handle disciplinary actions." "Very well," she said. "I'll expect a copy." When she stepped outside the station, the night air felt cold against her skin. She took a slow breath and looked up at the sky. Stars dotted the darkness above, calm and steady. The same stars she had looked at on countless missions overseas, reminding her of home, of purpose. A black government car pulled up to the curb. Colonel Ramirez stepped out, his uniform crisp, his expression a mixture of relief and disbelief. "Ma'am," he said, saluting her with deep respect. "I came as soon as I could." Denise smiled faintly. "I told you, Colonel. I'm fine." "Ma'am, the Pentagon's furious," he said. "They're already drafting a statement. Those officers will be removed." Denise shook her head slightly. "Let's not make this about revenge, Colonel. Let's make it about awareness." He nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am." They got into the car together. As the driver pulled away, the flashing lights of the police station faded behind them. Denise leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes. The hum of the engine mixed with her quiet thoughts. She thought of her soldiers, the ones she had mentored through storms of confusion and fear. She thought of the moments when she had taught them that true leadership wasn't about shouting orders, but about listening, even when it was uncomfortable. The car moved through the quiet streets, past sleeping houses and dim streetlights. When they reached her home, her son was standing on the porch, waiting. The moment she stepped out, he ran toward her and hugged her tightly. "Mom, where were you? I saw police cars on the news, and was that you?" he asked, his voice shaking. She held him close. "It's all right, sweetheart. I'm home now. Everything's fine." He looked up at her with worried eyes. "Did they hurt you?" She smiled softly and brushed his hair back. "No, they just didn't know who they were dealing with." Her words were calm, but behind them was something deeper. Not pride, not arrogance, but quiet strength. She led him inside, the house warm and bright against the night outside. As she sat on the couch later, sipping tea, her phone buzzed again. A message from the Pentagon confirmed what she already knew. The incident was being reviewed and both officers would be suspended. But more importantly, a national discussion had already begun. People wanted to know how a respected general could be treated that way in her own country. Denise stared at the message for a long time. Then she set her phone down and whispered to herself, "Maybe something good will come from this." Outside, the wind rustled softly through the trees. The neighborhood had gone quiet again, unaware that something extraordinary had just happened within its streets. A moment that would remind many about dignity, patience, and the power of calm in the face of injustice. The next morning began quietly. The sun rose over the Capitol, washing the streets with soft golden light. General Denise Parker sat at her kitchen table, her cup of coffee untouched. She hadn't slept much. Her mind replayed the night before, the flashing lights, the handcuffs, the quiet apologies. It all felt unreal. Her son sat across from her, scrolling through his phone. "Mom," he said carefully, "you're on the news." Denise looked up, her eyebrows lifting slightly. "The news?" He nodded. "Someone filmed what happened last night. It's everywhere." She sighed softly and took the phone from him. The video played on the screen, a shaky clip taken from across the street. It showed her standing calmly beside her car while the two officers handcuffed her. The sound of neighbors gasping could be heard faintly in the background. Within minutes, the clip had spread across social media. The caption read, "Local police handcuff U.S. Army general during traffic stop." Denise placed the phone down slowly. "Well," she said quietly, "I suppose there's no going back now." Her son frowned. "Are you mad, Mom?" She shook her head. "No, just sad that it happened this way." She stood and walked toward the window, watching as sunlight filtered through the trees outside. Her neighbors were already talking. A few had seen the news, too. Across the street, an elderly woman waved from her porch. Denise waved back with a faint smile. Then her phone rang. The caller ID read Pentagon, Office of Public Affairs. She answered immediately. "General Parker," said a firm voice on the line. "This is Deputy Secretary Hayes. Are you all right?" "Yes, sir," she replied. "I'm fine." "Good," he said. "I wanted to inform you that the situation is under review. We've already contacted the local police department. The video has drawn national attention. We'll need you to provide a short statement for the record." "I understand," she said calmly. "Also," he continued, "the Chief of Staff has requested that you refrain from speaking to the media until further notice. We want to handle this carefully." "Of course," Denise said. "I'll cooperate." When she ended the call, her son looked worried. "Are you in trouble?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "No, sweetheart. But it seems others might be." A few hours later, as she sat in her study reviewing old service documents, another call came, this time from Colonel Ramirez. Ma'am, he said quickly. The Pentagon just released a statement confirming the incident. They mentioned your name publicly. Every major news channel is covering it. Reporters are already outside your neighborhood, Denise sighed. I expected that. Ma'am, Ramirez said carefully, the secretary himself wants to talk to you. They're setting up a conference call within the hour. Understood, she said. Patch me in when it's ready. When the call began, her screen filled with familiar faces. Men and women she had worked with for years, all wearing serious expressions. The Pentagon seal glowed in the corner of the video feed. General Parker, said the Secretary of Defense, his voice deep and calm, I want to start by saying we're deeply sorry for what happened. No officer of your standing should be treated in that manner, not after a lifetime of service. Thank you, sir, Denise replied, but I don't want this to become about me. I'd rather it become a lesson. That's precisely why we're calling, he said. Your restraint and calm have impressed everyone here. We want to ensure that the story isn't about anger, but about leadership under pressure. Denise nodded slightly. That's all I ever wanted, to lead by example. There was a moment of silence before another voice joined in. General Marcus Steele, an old friend and colleague. Denise, he said, his tone softer. You've done more for this country than most can imagine. The way you handled yourself last night, it's being shown in classrooms today. The Academy called it a masterclass in discipline. She smiled faintly. I just did what I was trained to do, stay calm. After the call ended, she sat quietly for a while. Her thoughts drifted back to the officers who had arrested her. Despite everything, she didn't want revenge. She wanted change. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, her phone rang again, this time from an unexpected number. It was the police chief. General Parker, he began hesitantly. I wanted to reach out personally. The department has been flooded with calls. People are demanding answers. The mayor is holding a press conference tomorrow morning. I understand, she said evenly. I hope you'll use this moment wisely. He hesitated. Ma'am, would you be willing to meet with me privately before the conference? I believe your presence could help bring calm to the situation. Denise thought for a moment. Yes, she said finally. I'll meet you tomorrow at 8 a.m. When she arrived the next morning, the atmosphere at the station was completely different from the night she was arrested. Officers stood quietly as she entered, some looking down, others saluting respectfully. The chief greeted her with a handshake, his expression humble. Thank you for coming, ma'am, he said. I can't tell you how embarrassed I am by what happened. Those 2 officers have been placed on administrative leave pending a full review. Denise nodded. I'm not here for apologies, Chief. I'm here to help ensure this doesn't happen to anyone else. They sat in his office, the blinds drawn, the morning light cutting thin lines across the desk. Denise spoke softly but firmly. It's not about punishment, Chief, it's about awareness. I've spent my life teaching soldiers how to lead with empathy. That lesson should apply here too. He nodded slowly. You're right, General. We've already begun diversity and conduct retraining for our staff. But the damage is done. People are angry. Then show them responsibility, Denise said gently. Admit what went wrong. Don't defend the mistake. Fix it. The chief looked deeply moved. You have my word, ma'am. By noon, the press conference began. Cameras lined the street outside the station. Reporters held microphones as the chief stood before them, flanked by city officials. Denise stayed off to the side, not wanting to draw attention. The chief cleared his throat. Yesterday, our department made a grave mistake, he said into the microphones. Major General Denise Parker, a decorated officer of the United States Army, was treated unfairly during a routine stop. We have issued a formal apology to her and are taking immediate corrective action. Reporters shouted questions. Is it true she was handcuffed? Were the officers suspended? Has the Pentagon contacted you? The chief answered carefully but honestly. Yes, she was handcuffed. Yes, the officers are suspended. And yes, the Pentagon has been in touch. We are cooperating fully. Later that evening, Denise watched the press coverage from her living room. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from fellow officers, friends, and even strangers, thanking her for how she handled the situation. But she didn't feel like a hero. She felt like someone standing at the edge of a much larger conversation, one about fairness, respect, and the importance of calm leadership. Her son walked in and sat beside her. Mom, he said softly, are you proud? Denise looked at him and smiled. I'm proud that I didn't let anger speak for me. He nodded slowly. Grandpa would be proud too. She reached out and took his hand. Maybe that's the real victory, sweetheart. Not proving others wrong, but staying true to yourself no matter what. The television played footage of the Pentagon statement, confirming that an official review was underway. The newscaster called it a lesson in dignity and discipline. Outside, night fell quietly again. Denise stood by the window, watching the city lights shimmer in the distance. For the first time since that evening, she felt a deep peace settle over her heart. She had turned humiliation into something greater, an opportunity to remind others that strength is not in force, but in calm. Somewhere far away, the phones at the Pentagon were still ringing, the story still spreading. But Denise Parker didn't need to hear any of it. She had done her part, and her conscience was clear. She whispered softly to herself, one call to the Pentagon might have ended their careers, but one act of grace can change how the world learns. And with that thought, she turned off the lights, knowing tomorrow would bring something new, a chance to lead again, not from behind a desk, but from the quiet power of example. The following week, the story of Major General Denise Parker spread far beyond the small town where it began. Newspapers across the country printed her photo beside headlines like, Army General handcuffed in her own neighborhood, and Calm under pressure. How a U.S. general handled injustice with grace. TV anchors replayed the video of her arrest, describing her composed reaction as a model of dignity. Talk shows discussed it, and veterans groups rallied in her support. Even people who had never heard of her name before began to learn about her long career, her humanitarian missions overseas, her leadership during crisis operations, and her reputation for fairness and humility. At the Pentagon, her name was spoken with respect and concern. Many younger officers looked up to her, calling her an example of discipline and courage. Her calm, steady face in that viral clip had become a silent lesson in leadership. Meanwhile, at the local police department, everything had changed. The two officers who had arrested her, Reed and Miller, were suspended pending an internal investigation. The department's chief ordered immediate retraining for all officers on respectful communication, bias awareness, and professional conduct. For Denise, however, life returned to quiet routine. She didn't seek interviews, didn't post statements online, and didn't demand punishment. Instead, she focused on her work. Every morning, she arrived at her office in uniform, her posture as perfect as ever, her expression calm and determined. But everywhere she went, people recognized her. Some saluted her in the hallway. Others stopped her just to say, "Ma'am, thank you for how you handled it." One afternoon, she received an invitation from the National Leadership Forum, asking her to give a keynote speech on ethics and discipline in public service. She agreed, though humbly. The day of the speech, the auditorium was filled with officers, cadets, and civil servants from across the country. Cameras rolled, reporters waited. When Denise walked onto the stage, the entire audience stood and applauded. She waited for the noise to settle, then began softly, "A week ago, I was handcuffed for asking a question." The room fell silent. "I could stand here today angry or bitter," she continued. "But instead, I stand here to say that silence and calm can be more powerful than shouting." That night, I remembered something my father told me when I was a child. When someone forgets your worth, don't remind them with anger. Remind them by standing tall. A quiet murmur filled the hall. Some in the audience nodded, others took notes. She went on, her voice steady but full of feeling. Those officers didn't see a general. They saw only what they wanted to see. But we all have the power to change that, by choosing to respond with respect even when we're not given any. When she finished, the crowd rose again in applause. It wasn't loud or chaotic, it was slow, heartfelt, and respectful. Afterward, young officers came to her one by one, thanking her for showing that real strength means staying calm when you're tested. Later that night, as she left the venue, a reporter caught up to her near the exit. "General Parker," he said politely, "many people are calling you a hero. How do you feel about that?" Denise smiled gently. "Heroes are the ones who protect others. I just protected my own peace." The next morning, her words appeared in newspapers across the nation. Back in the small town where it all started, the police department was now under review by state authorities. The mayor held another press conference promising reform and better community relations. He mentioned Denise's grace and leadership as a model for everyone. Officer Reed, sitting in his small apartment, watched that same press conference on TV. His face was pale and tired. The weight of his mistake sat heavy on his shoulders. He replayed the video of that night over and over, the calm way Denise had looked at him, the quiet disappointment in her eyes. He finally understood the depth of what he had done, not just to her but to the uniform he himself wore. For days he couldn't sleep. Then one morning he wrote a letter. It wasn't ordered by anyone. He just felt he had to write it. The letter began, "Dear General Parker, there are no words strong enough to undo what I did, but I want to say I'm deeply sorry. You taught me more in one night than years of training ever could. I saw strength that didn't need shouting. I hope to earn back a fraction of the respect I lost that evening." When Denise received the letter at her office, she read it slowly. Then she folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer. There was no anger in her heart, only a quiet sense of closure. That evening she called Colonel Ramirez. "Colonel," she said softly, "would you arrange a visit with the police department?" He sounded surprised. "Ma'am, are you sure you want to do that?" "Yes," she said. "It's time to talk to them directly." The next day she arrived at the station, not in anger but with purpose. Every officer in the building stood as she entered. The air was heavy with tension and respect. The chief greeted her, followed by the same two officers who had once handcuffed her. Their faces showed deep regret. Denise looked around the room before speaking. "I'm not here to talk about punishment," she said. "I'm here to talk about perspective. Every badge you wear represents trust. Every person you meet is someone's family, someone's child, someone's parent. Remember that before you act." Her tone wasn't harsh. It was calm and honest, the kind of voice that carried the weight of wisdom. She turned to the two officers. "I forgive you," she said quietly. "But don't let this forgiveness make you forget the lesson. Let it make you better." Reed nodded, his voice barely a whisper. "Thank you, ma'am." When she left the station, the staff stood in silence. Some had tears in their eyes. The chief later said that her visit changed the department more than any disciplinary order could. As days passed, Denise noticed how the conversation around her story began to shift. People weren't just talking about the arrest anymore. They were talking about calm leadership, emotional intelligence, and respect across communities. Training programs across the country used her story as an example of how dignity could reshape conflict. One evening, as she walked through the Pentagon corridor, she passed a group of young cadets. One of them whispered, "That's her, the general from the video." The others straightened up immediately, watching her with admiration. Denise gave them a small nod and kept walking. She didn't need fame or praise. What mattered to her was knowing that perhaps somewhere, someone would think twice before reacting with anger or judgment. At home that night, she sat on her porch with her son. The air was cool, the sky full of stars. "Mom," he said quietly, "do you think those officers learned something?" She smiled softly. "I think we all did, sweetheart." He leaned against her shoulder. "Everyone's talking about you on TV. They say you changed how people see leadership." Denise looked at the stars, their light steady and calm. "If I changed anything," she said, "it's only because I didn't let the moment change who I am." Her son nodded thoughtfully. "Grandpa used to say the same thing." "I know," she whispered. "He taught me that respect isn't demanded, it's shown." The night breeze rustled the trees and the sound of distant traffic faded into quiet. In that peaceful moment she felt something rare, a sense that all the pain and embarrassment had turned into something meaningful. Across the nation, leaders, teachers, and citizens were now quoting her words, sharing her story, and remembering the image of a calm woman standing tall in the face of injustice. And for Denise Parker, that was enough. She didn't need medals or headlines. Her strength was her silence. Her victory was her calm, and her legacy was the quiet reminder that respect, once lost, can still be rebuilt with grace. Weeks passed, but the story of Major General Denise Parker did not fade away. What had started as a small local incident had turned into a national lesson. Schools used her story to teach respect. Police academies discussed it in ethics classes. And in workplaces, leaders quoted her words about calm and dignity in moments of pressure. Denise, however, didn't seek attention. She returned to her normal duties quietly. To her, the event was no longer about embarrassment or anger. It was about understanding. Something within her had changed. She felt lighter, wiser, and somehow more connected to the world around her. Every morning she would go for a jog around her neighborhood. People she had never met before would wave to her, young and old, neighbors and strangers alike. Sometimes she would stop and talk to them. Some thanked her for setting an example. Others shared their own experiences with unfair treatment or misunderstanding. Denise listened carefully to each of them, giving them the same attention she would give a fellow soldier. One morning, a young woman approached her near the park. She looked nervous but determined. "General Parker," she said softly, "my brother is a police officer. He told me what happened to you changed how he works. He said he never realized how much his words could affect someone. I just wanted to thank you." Denise smiled warmly. "Tell him I'm proud of him. Change begins the moment we start to understand each other." The young woman nodded gratefully and walked away, her eyes shining with respect. That evening, Denise sat on her porch with a notebook in her lap. The air smelled of rain and the sound of crickets filled the yard. She began to write, not a report or a speech, but a letter to her younger self. She wrote, "Dear Denise, one day you will face a moment that tests everything you believe in. You will be judged unfairly, but how you respond will define you more than the event itself. Remember, dignity is not what people give you. It's what you carry inside." She smiled faintly as she closed the notebook. It wasn't meant for anyone else. It was her reminder that even in hardship, grace is a kind of strength. A week later, she was invited to a televised interview. She had declined many before, but this one was different. The interviewer was a retired veteran who had served under her command years ago. Out of respect for him, she agreed. When the cameras began rolling, the interviewer started gently. "General Parker, millions saw that video. Many called it painful, others called it inspiring. What did it feel like for you?" Denise thought for a moment before answering. "It felt like a test," she said slowly. "A test not of my rank, but of my character. In that moment, I realized that leadership isn't about commanding others. It's about commanding yourself." The interviewer nodded. "And how do you want people to remember this story?" She smiled softly. "Not as a story about punishment or blame. I want them to remember it as a story about choice. The choice to remain calm, to stay kind, even when kindness isn't given to you." The studio went silent for a moment. Her words hung in the air like a gentle truth. When the interview aired that evening, viewers across the country wrote letters to the network, saying her message had touched them deeply. The following week, Denise received a letter from a small-town high school principal. He invited her to speak at their graduation ceremony. "Our students watched your interview," he wrote. "They said you showed them what strength really looks like." When she arrived on graduation day, the students cheered. The gymnasium was decorated with banners and balloons, the air filled with hope and excitement. Denise stood on the stage in her dress uniform, her medals shining softly under the lights. She began her speech with a calm smile. "When I was your age," she said, "I believed strength meant never showing weakness. But over time, I learned that true strength means staying kind, even when the world is not kind to you." The students listened closely. She continued, "One day you will all face moments that feel unfair or painful. When that happens, don't lose yourself in anger. Stand tall. Speak with calm, because the way you respond to hardship will speak louder than the hardship itself." The crowd erupted into applause when she finished. Teachers, parents, and students stood together, moved by her words. After the ceremony, a young man in uniform approached her. He had just joined the local police department. "Ma'am," he said respectfully, "I was one of the recruits who went through the new training program after your story. They showed us the video and told us to learn from it. It changed the way I see people. Thank you for giving us another chance to do better." Denise shook his hand firmly. "Thank you for choosing to serve with honor," she said kindly. As the days went on, life settled into a peaceful rhythm again. But one morning she received a call from the Pentagon. They informed her that she was being nominated for a special award, one not for combat or service abroad, but for exemplary conduct and public leadership. When she attended the ceremony, the hall was filled with generals, officers, and dignitaries. The Secretary of Defense himself stepped forward to present the medal. He said, Major General Denise Parker reminded this nation that discipline is not about authority. It's about self-control. She showed us that respect cannot be demanded. It must be lived. As the medal was placed around her neck, the room erupted in applause. Denise stood there, proud but humble. She didn't smile for recognition. She smiled because she knew something good had come from something painful. After the ceremony, she stepped outside, where the air was cool and the sky clear. Reporters waited, but she didn't stop for interviews. Instead, she walked quietly toward a nearby garden filled with small American flags and white roses, a memorial to those who had served before her. She paused there, taking a deep breath. "Thank you," she whispered softly, as if speaking to the generations who had paved the way before her. That night, as she sat on her porch again, her son joined her with 2 cups of tea. "Mom," he said, smiling, "I saw your ceremony. You looked amazing." She chuckled softly. "It's just a medal, sweetheart." "No," he said, shaking his head, "it's more than that. It's proof that being calm can change the world." Denise looked at him, her heart full of quiet pride. "Maybe," she said, "but the real proof is when others start doing the same." He nodded and leaned against her shoulder. The stars above were bright and peaceful, shining across the quiet town that had once been the scene of her worst humiliation, and now stood as a symbol of respect and reform. From somewhere far away, a faint breeze carried the sound of a distant flag fluttering. It reminded her of her father's old words, the ones that had guided her through every challenge. The strongest voice is the one that doesn't need to shout. Denise closed her eyes and smiled. She had faced unfairness, yet she had turned it into understanding. She had been tested, yet she had responded with grace. And in doing so, she had taught a nation that real power isn't in force, it's in calmness, compassion, and courage. As the night deepened, she whispered quietly, almost to herself, "We can't always choose what happens to us, but we can always choose how we respond." The world would go on talking about her story for months, but for her, it was already complete. The lesson had been learned, the storm had passed, and peace had returned. And so, under the soft light of the moon, Major General Denise Parker sat quietly with her son, sipping her tea, surrounded by the stillness she had earned, not through battle or command, but through the simple, timeless power of dignity.